Hello and welcome to Thursdays on the Stoop. Today we have Right on Time, Chronology and Fiction with Sofia M. Rabaté. Sofia is a writer and educator based in Philadelphia. She attended the University of Pennsylvania and later earned her MFA from Temple University, where she was the editor of TINGE Magazine. And if this is your first Blue Stoop event, we are a literary arts nonprofit serving the greater Philadelphia area with classes, events, and professional opportunities. Fall classes open as soon as this Friday, TBD. That would be September 5th. And you can learn more about that at bluestoop.org/classes. We've got financial aid, payment plans, and a variety of things to pick from. So be sure to check that out. I'll share links to our newsletter and other things in the chat shortly. But first and foremost, Sofia, take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Julian. It's great to meet you all. As I'm getting set up, would everyone mind sharing in the chat what you're working on writing-wise most recently? I would love to hear, and you can get as detailed as you want or as non-detailed as you would like. What is everybody working on writing-wise? All right. Now, as I'm getting this, is everyone seeing my screen? The classic question. All right. Let me try that again. And I see here in the chat a speculative novel with multiple POVs, literary fiction novel, a memoir, lit fic novel, memoir, a haunted house with issues. Wow, that sounds great. A short story collection, sci-fi, a short story where a young girl discovers a cursed object that slowly turns her into literal gold. Wow, these are great. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I would love for all of us to think about our projects as we are going through this lesson and thinking about the topic of writing time. I think it's a really helpful topic and that can be applicable to what we're working on. All right. We had tried this. Interesting. Okay. Everyone can see my screen? Great. Um, so that is our introduction. Thank you all for sharing a little bit of where you're from and what you're writing. A little bit about me, if you're curious. I'm from Philadelphia, born and raised, and I still live here. I am mostly a short story fiction writer. That's where I feel most comfortable. But most recently, I've been working on a novel, pushing me a little bit outside of my boundaries. So that's where I'm coming from. And that's the project that I'm thinking about as I'm thinking about writing time. I got my MFA from Temple, and at Temple, I was the editor of TINGE Magazine, the literary magazine there. And it was such valuable experience for me to read and be on the other side. It really helped me understand how the work is perceived by editors on the other side of the process. And it really made me realize that you have to grab readers at the beginning. I don't think I really fully understood that until I had to read something and form an opinion about it pretty quickly. I've also done some copy editing, so I am pretty interested in the nitty-gritty of grammar and spelling and that kind of stuff. And I've taught writing and fiction workshops at Temple, so I've taught both first-year writing and academic writing, and also fiction workshops. So I've led the workshop there, and those were really fantastic experiences. So that's a little bit about me, and thank you all for joining us tonight for Right on Time. So let's get into the topic of writing time. And I got the idea for this because recently I was struggling with my own writing. And a lot of times when I'm struggling with time, I feel like I am playing with dolls in a dollhouse. So I don't know if people play with their dolls differently as kids, if you did play with dolls. But the way I played with them is I would move them around step by step. I would not make them actually teleport to the bottom floor. I would walk them through the hallway, walk them down the little steps, walk them through. And sometimes when I'm writing, I feel like, especially if I'm picturing a house, I am picturing my little characters like dolls and I'm moving them around. So if we're starting off in the morning, I'm moving them through the hallway. Maybe they need to brush their teeth next. I'm moving them into the bathroom because they need to brush their teeth. And then wait, we have to move through the hallway first before we get to the bathroom. And it can feel kind of infinite if we feel like we have to move our characters through every step, because that is how we experience life, so it does make sense that we would go there before thinking it through more. but I would like to encourage us and give us ideas for how to skip through this because this can slow us down and make the writing bog down. So I would love to go beyond the dollhouse approach and skip ahead in time playfully. We're totally in control of time when we're writing, and I want to remind us of that. I feel like I forget that, a lot of writers forget. We're totally in control. We don't have to write the way we experience time, which is experience every single second, um, all in order. We don't have to write that way, and time doesn't have to slow us down. We can use time to do what we need to do in our story. And generally, the main tension when writing time is traditionally seen as in-scene writing versus summary. So in scene, we're more in the moment, we're getting the details, things are happening, the important things happening. In summary, we're not in the moment. We're getting a summary, we're skipping over, but still getting some of it. And so the biggest tension is when do we have in scene and when do we have summary? We could do all in scene if for some reason we wanted to account for everything. Um, but we don't always want to give equal importance to everything, right? Usually there's something important happening, a blank, and then the next important thing happening. And usually the classic approach would be we're using in scene when the important thing is happening, and then we're using summary in between to get to the next important thing and get to the next scene. But there's a third option that we can also consider, which is skipping ahead. So a lot of times I will feel like in my own first drafts or in other first drafts, we forget that we can skip ahead, which seems so obvious. Um, but we can just get to the next part, right? One day we can start a story in July and we can just, with a simple move, say in November, this happened. And we don't have to say the summer passed with lots of heat and the warm weather turned cold and the leaves fell. It can be really tempting, like, oh, I need to summarize. I need to account for all the months in between July and November. But we really don't have to if it's not serving us. Sometimes it is serving us if there's some reason for the story needing to show the passage of time. If we're like, well, I really need to show, that something's happening in between. But I would say, in my opinion, there's lots of situations where we don't need the in-between. And we can just skip summary totally and skip ahead to another point in time. And that can be really impactful. The reasons I think it's impactful is that, first of all, when we are moving through time and summary unnecessarily, a lot of times we can feel like a pressure to make that writing beautiful or more important than it is. And then that's when cheesiness can kind of sneak in. And that's when we might get a sentence like, oh, dark and stormy night, or a little bit of cheesy language that we didn't intend to put there just to make the summary feel necessary. But I want to throw out some opportunities for us to just skip ahead in time and get to what we need to get to, and we're going to practice that today. Um, so what I have for us is a first example from a manual for cleaning women. I have the book right here to show that I really do like this book, and I have it here. This is by Lucia Berlin, an author I really like. And this is a great collection of short stories if you're interested in reading it. And I'm mostly going to focus in on Silence, one of the stories in this collection. It is my favorite one of this collection, though there's a lot of good ones here. And in this short story, Silence, it starts off with a childhood narrator's very difficult childhood. And I won't say too much because I would like for you to read it if you're interested. But it's a very difficult childhood, and most of the story, time moves mostly traditionally with a mix of, like we were talking before, a mix of in-scene and summary, and we're mostly in the moment. Um, the climax is a really upsetting scene with this character Uncle John where he is driving a truck drunk and something happens that I'll leave for you to read. And so there's that upsetting scene, and then we get this ending, which is a real gut punch of an ending. Right after that, we get this ending, which moves a lot actually ahead in time compared to the rest of the story. So I'll read this out. The ending is, the war ended and my father came home. We moved to South America. Uncle John ended up on Skid Row in Los Angeles, a really hopeless wino. Then he met Dora, who played trumpet in the Salvation Army band. She had him go into the shelter and have some soup, and she talked to him. She said later that he made her laugh. They fell in love and were married, and he never drank again. When I was older, I went to visit them in Los Angeles. She was working as a riveter at Lockheed, and he had an antique repair shop in his garage. They were maybe the sweetest two people I ever knew. Sweet together, I mean. We went to Forest Lawn and La Brea Tar Pits and the Grotto restaurant. Mostly I helped Uncle John in the shop, sanding furniture, polishing with the turpentine and the linseed oil rag. We talked about life, told jokes. Neither one of us mentioned El Paso. Of course, by this time I had realized all the reasons why he couldn't stop the truck, because by this time I was an alcoholic. So a real devastating gut punch of an ending for sure. Does anyone want to share any reactions in the chat? Is there anything you really like about this, about how this skips ahead in time? I mean, it skips ahead a really insane amount. The war ended, we moved to South America, and then now, sneakily, this character gets older, right? This character gets older, and an undetermined amount of time happens. Any quick reaction in the chat? What do you like about what this is doing and moving ahead in time? I see one chat. Isn't this a straight up summary? Yeah, it is a summary, and I love how the summary isn't filler and isn't a way to get somewhere, but it is really beautifully written, I would say. I think I really like it and respond well to it. And I think summary sometimes is seen as a way to get to the next important thing. And I think here it is something that we're getting to on its own. And then I have another comment about a happily ever after ending only to hit you with them becoming alcoholic. Yes, I think there's that twist there. There's so much about the happiness of Uncle John, and that last sentence is really, really devastating. And I have a comment. I feel like the temptation to narrate every moment is less pressing when the amount of time is years and years instead of same day, for example. That's true. And you were predicting a little bit of what we're going to do next, but I'm going to encourage you in a second to take that challenge and see how, when we're thinking about years and years, we're spared the need to stick stuck in time when we don't need to or we don't want to. Then I see so much changes and you don't really realize the character is getting older, but the last sentence shows this happening. It's like the character's arc was compressed. I think that's why this ending works so well. It being compressed is what makes it such a gut punch. That's true. And when there's so much seeming summary, it has me notice where the precisions are. Yeah, that's true. It is summary, right? But summary doesn't have to mean there's no detail. It's summary because we're not in a specific moment, but it is detailed too. We're getting the linseed oil, we're getting the turpentine, we are getting, the Salvation Army. It is really ripe with details for being summary. Yes, thank you everyone for your thoughts. I pretty much agree with all of them. And I wanted to bring attention to summary. I think summary is sometimes overlooked and underestimated as a really powerful tool. For me, writing works really well for me. And again, that's just an opinion. Um, some people might have the opinion that this writing doesn't work for them, sorry. But in my opinion, I think the summaries can really hit and can give you that gut punch ending, and can really work emotionally. I especially like the sentence, they fell in love and were married and he never drank again. It's so quick and it uses such general words, but for me, that I'm really drawn to that as well. Yes, the Lucia Berlin is the master of devastating detail. Yes. Devastating detail. I love that. Awesome. Well, let's try it for ourselves. We were talking about how when we are writing years or decades, we're less tied to those details and we're not getting bogged down. And one of my goals of this session is to help us find ways to get unstuck and unbogged down. And I would love for us to try that out. and write for, let's say, 5 minutes. So it's 4:19. It might be 4:20 by the time I'm done speaking. But let's open up a Google document, and I will do that too in live time. And let's write for about 5 minutes on this topic. Let's cover time in terms of years or decades, a whole huge swath of someone's life. And let's see how we can put in those details. Even in summary, we can put in details, but we can feel free. We can feel free to go from someone being 10 to being 20 to being 30. We can skip ahead in time. So I'm going to actually go ahead and stop sharing. And let's take until about 4, let's say 25. Let's give ourselves that extra minute because 4:19 is about to end soon. And let's take until 4:25 and write that, and then we'll come back. If it's more comfortable for you to write with your camera off, I understand. But if you'd like to keep it on, I'll be keeping it on as well. Well, so we'll come back at 4:25. All right, it's 4:25. Oh, there we go. Now it's working. All right, I would love to hear from everyone. If you'd like to unmute or use the chat, tell me about your experience writing this prompt. I'm really curious to hear what kind of time span you picked in your character, what it was like to write, and if you'd like to share um, a favorite sentence or two, you sure can. And if not, I would still be happy to hear just about the experience of writing it.
I'll say
Okay.
something. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Oh wait, was it supposed to be in the chat? I can put it in the chat.
No, out loud is fine. It's either I like to give the option because I know as writers sometimes they prefer to type, but if you'd rather say, I'd love to hear from you.
Okay. It was a challenge for me because I'm like really super detailed oriented while I write, like trying to capture maybe even I don't know, like so yeah, like the in between or I didn't have time for certain details and then I found myself going like, "Oh, I'm showing, not telling," or this or that. But then I kind of liked just this taste of the past and then the active moment of getting to the 50-year-old age, which I'm turning soon. So I drew on my own life. So yeah, it was cool.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, challenging is right. I also struggle in some places where I felt like didn't want to move ahead. I wanted to stay in that moment. But I think it can produce some really great things as we're trying the exercise. And I really liked hearing about your tension between showing and telling. It's always our tension as writers, and I think one of the takeaways that telling can really work too, right? Like being told, and we're being told a lot in the example from the short story Silence, and I think it really works there. Let me go through some of our chats. I've used summary to end a novel, but I never thought of using it at the beginning of a short story, and it had success. I love that comment because I feel like traditionally summary is more for the short story. Um, I feel like in novels we have more of a push and pull of mostly scene and summary, and I don't feel like we'd have an entire novel of summary, for example. We could have an entire short story of summary because I think there's a bit more of the tradition that we can be experimental. Um, and then I have here a quote. Thank you so much for sharing what you wrote. Um, Thank you, Ravneet. I love how you wrote the later they would break up. I like that little flash forward. That's another great use of the time moving forward. We have another chat. If free is freeing to jump ahead from childhood to adult years. Yeah, I love to hear that. I think any writer should feel free. I think a lot of times we don't feel free. We feel like I have to do this or I have to do that. But we are very free. We can really do whatever. It doesn't always work, but we can do whatever. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us. And then I have another chat. A character from six to being in college. Wow, that's a huge time span. Um, it was fun to pick and choose what things to give attention to. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a helpful exercise in what is important. When are we sprinkling in those details and when are we not? I think it reveals what's really important and what you really want to write about. And that's one of the themes of this lesson. I would love for us to only write what we want to write about. And if stuff is just in between stuff, like we just need to make 6 months pass, we shouldn't write it honestly. If it doesn't matter, you can just say 6 months later, comma. or in the winter, comma, right? We can really only write what we want to write, and we can skip the stuff that just because in real life we'd have to go through the boring stuff, we don't have to put it in there as writers. So that's really a really cool reminder of our power to really do whatever. I'd love to move on to a second example where it was a little bit previewed in one of our comments. A second example of what we can do with time that is freeing and playful, and allows us to do what we want to do, and what we need to do with the story, and not what we feel like we have to do. This is an example from the book Eileen that I loved. I have it here as well. And this is from the same author as My Year of Rest and Relaxation. If we know this author, and I believe it's her first novel, if I'm correct. And this novel, Eileen, is about a young girl, young woman, told from the perspective of an older narrator. So I think that was really interested in that, where a lot of times when we're writing in past tense, we don't know where the present tense voice is from. Sometimes it's just past tense from some unspecified later time. And we just use past tense as a way to tell the story. For all intents and purposes, we are in the moment, in that present, just writing in past tense. And I thought it was really interesting that this book reminded me, excuse me, that we can let our readers know where that person is speaking from if it serves our story. So this story is told from the point of view of a much older version of the narrator, many decades later, and she is looking back on her younger self. And she consistently throughout the book is comparing her older self and younger self, and even making fun of her young self, like those clothes I wore, how silly those clothes were. I can't believe I felt that way back then. I was so worried about this, and now I know it doesn't matter. I don't care about that at all. And I thought that was interesting as a way to tell things to the audience, to the reader, by contrasting the older narrator's point of view with her past view. And I think it was a really smart way to get some information out to the reader. So here's a part from towards the beginning of the book, where she writes, so here we are. My name was Eileen Dunlop. Now you know me. I was 24 years old and had a job that paid $57 a week as a kind of secretary at a private juvenile correctional facility for teenage boys. I think of it now as what it really was for all intents and purposes, a prison for children. I will call it Moorhead. Delvin Moorhead was a terrible landlord I had years later, and so to use his name for such a place feels appropriate. In a week, I would run away from home and never go back. This is the story of how I disappeared. All right, so great foreshadowing, tension building. I would run away from home. In a week, I would run away from home and never go back. When I read that, I was like, all right, I'm in. I'm really excited to read the rest of this book. And also that little sneaky call to the future here, right? I will call it Moorhead after this landlord I had years later. So another way of moving forward in time is when we're using the past tense, if we would like to do so, we can flash forward, because implied in any past tense is that we're talking about it at a later point. We can flash forward to something that's going to happen later, but not like in the past exercise, we're moving forward and moving forward and moving forward and moving forward. If we would not like to do that, we can flash forward and then go back, right? We are in this past with the younger Eileen. We flash forward to some aspects of the older narrator's life, and then we head back to the present that we want to be in. So if we do not want to be skipping ahead and ahead and ahead, like we did before, we can also use a flash forward strategy to move ahead and then move back and say something. And I feel like we see a lot of flashbacks in writing. We see plenty of them, and we don't see flash forwards so much. We don't see it as frequently, and I think it's a really useful thing to remember that we can do. We can say, I was walking in the street, this was going to be the worst year of my life, and I didn't know it yet. And you can kind of surprise your reader by putting in that later or older narrator's point of view, when it's unexpected. So if we're reading something all in past tense, you could kind of shock or surprise the reader by putting that in without revealing, oh, I'm older now, or this happened last year, and revealing where we're writing from or where the narrator is speaking from. I'll open this up to any thoughts about this, about flash forwarding. Um, do you have any examples of it that you like, or how do you like that this author is doing it in Eileen? Any reactions to this? Ooh, thank you so much for this example. Um, the film Chungking Express um, has a flash forward. This is the first time we met. In 6 hours, she will have fallen in love with another man. Paraphrasing. Yeah, yeah, that's so cool. I think for me, what that's doing, it's grabbing your attention. You know, you're like, oh, I'm super interested. It's getting the audience pulled in. Um, and then we have another chat. The author tells us so much in the paragraph by giving details of her job and then flashing forward economic use of the space. Yes, definitely, right? There's just so much going on. A prison for children, terrible landlord, right? Um, yeah, I think in such a short paragraph, so much is happening. Chronicle of a Death Foreseen, Reddit and friend. I Chronicle of a Death Foretold, I think that might be the title that I'm thinking of. Yeah. Yeah, the flash forward is a great example of a flash forward, and I think that it is underused and a really cool thing. The flip side is I think it can be cheesy. It can be cheesy, and I'm always nervous about being cheesy in my own writing. That's the thing I'm most afraid of, is being cheesy. And it can not work. But when it does work, it is so good. It works so well. And then I really like how she threw in the flash forward in a summary that is focused on the past. Yeah, and just another reminder, we don't have to let go of the past or the moment we want to talk about with that flash forward. Yeah, and then my name was versus my name is. My name, that's a great detail you caught. My name was, right, because there is another detail in this book where the older narrator talks about changing her name and totally getting rid of this identity. Yeah. And one more thing I think of when I think of flash forwards, it's very true to how we tell a story when we're telling a friend, right? And I think I like to try to emulate some of that energy when we're telling someone like some really good gossip, like this person came and, well, little did you know, this we were about to have another confrontation next week, or um this thing happened. It was about to be the worst day of my life. And I think that's true. When we tell a story, we are able to flash forward because we are in a later point in time when we are writing from that point. And this novel makes that explicit. It will explicitly say, I am older now. This was decades ago. This happened so long ago. I'm telling you the story. But I also like kind of the experimental side of not doing that, not saying I'm much older now, but kind of with no explanation, dropping that in of like, this was going to happen. I think that can be a little disorienting in a good way for a reader of, whoa, I didn't know that there was a narrator. I didn't know that there was a future time that we're speaking from. Thank you everyone so much for your thoughts. Really insightful. And again, I would love for us to take some time and try it out for ourselves. Maybe it'll give us a little bit more time than last time, since this one I feel like we could take a little bit longer on. And I would love for you to write a first person narrator who is writing from some point, and they're writing about the past, and they're revealing events like this person, they would turn out that way, this thing would be this way. And then also comparing how they were then to how they are now, because that's a great way to get around. It can be a little cheesy or a little cliche for you to tell the reader directly, this character is friendly, this character is this way. But it can be a great workaround to have a later narrator reminding themselves of how they were and being like, oh, I was so friendly, how ridiculous. You don't necessarily have to do this, but in Eileen, the older narrator is very dismissive of the younger narrator. So you don't necessarily have to do that, but you can if you would like to and if that would work for your exercise. So let's take a tiny bit longer. Let's take until, let's say, 4:50 to work on that, and then we'll come back and share about our writing exercise. So we'll take till 4:50 p.m. and I'll bring us back. All right, it's 4:50. So I would love again to hear from you all, either by unmuting or by using the chat. I would love to hear about either the experience of writing this and or a quote of a favorite sentence or two that you wrote, if you'd like to share your writing. But if you prefer not to share your writing, I'm still very interested in what the process was as you were writing this. When I see in the chat, we have a piece of writing. I knew exactly who I was going to be when I grew. Oh, I love that beginning. I think I knew exactly who I was going to be when I grew up would be a great beginning for a short story or for a novel. Right. I wish I could say that if I had known what she was going through, I'd have done anything to ease her stress, but it's a lie. I don't lie anymore. Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate reading these. I mean, based on these examples, I think this prompt got everyone thinking and produced some great writing. Yeah, I think it's a helpful workaround. Because, for example, in Eileen, the author talks about how the narrator thinks that she was beautiful, right? And I think if we have a character saying, "I'm so beautiful," it's gonna come across cheesy. It's not gonna work. Um, or we're gonna take that seriously, like, "Oh, I'm so beautiful, my beautiful looks and all of that." But I think it was helpful to get around the cheesiness to have an older narrator is thinking like, "Oh, I didn't think I was beautiful, but looking back on it, I wasn't quite nice looking." And I think it's nice to have that honesty, because the narrator has some space from the events. It can make us more honest, or make our characters more honest about what's going on, and it can also avoid a lot of the cheesiness that comes from communicating these same things in the moment, right? If you say this is the worst day of my life in the moment, I can that can border a little bit on cheesy more than a person later saying I've gone through X, Y, and Z, and I can say that this is the worst day of my life. Then you're like, all right, I believe it more. So that distance is really helpful, and this is a good reminder that whenever we're writing in past tense, there can be a present tense hidden that we're speaking from. And a lot of times there isn't. A lot of times past tense is used the very same way that present tense would be, where we're just strictly in the moment. But a good reminder that if your project is in past tense, there is a hidden present tense. Should you like or should you want to go there, you can go to that present, if that's helpful to you and helpful to what you're doing in your writing. And I would love everyone to think about, I asked at the beginning of this lesson what everyone was working on. And I hope that this workshop gave you some ideas of what you might want to do. And I would love everyone to think a little bit about any new idea or any new thought that you have about your project. I'm looking back here at our chats. We We had a memoir. So for memoir, there's definitely is a present, right? That's clearly there is a present. It's talking about the past tense. So I think that's definitely very suited to that. Um, we had also literary fiction, speculative novel, sci-fi novel, short story collection, haunted house novel, memoir, short story, flash fiction. So all of these, thank you so much for sharing what you were working on. Anyone have any thoughts of a new idea that they got, or did you get unstuck from a time problem that you were having in writing? I would love to hear from you all, either by unmuting or on the chat. And as we're waiting for people to type, um, I most recently was stuck in this very exact situation where I felt stuck in time. I was writing a scene where a character comes in and gives some important news, and the main character, the narrator, is in the kitchen, and the other character is coming in through the front door. And so I was like, okay, so we've got to give the news. And I'm like, wait, but first, the character's got to put down her stuff. She's could just come home from work. So I'm like, all right, let me write her putting down her stuff. And then I was like, but wait, but first, if she's by the door, she's far from the kitchen. We have to write this character coming over to the kitchen. And I'm like, wait, but has the character come fully all the way over to the stove or not? Or is the character at the entrance of the kitchen? So I'm like, now I have to write the character cross the kitchen and over to the stove. And I felt so like it's like that paradox of the arrow, that the arrow will never reach its destination because first it has to get halfway there, and then half of that, and then half of that, and then half of that. And I was doing exactly that in my writing. I was feeling like we had to even smaller steps in between to get to this kitchen. We were just never gonna get there. And I think that's why it is helpful to realize, you know what, if we need to get to the stove and the kitchen, we can just say, we can just get there. We don't need to move the characters through the house. They are not dolls that I'm moving around. All right, and thank you so much for typing in the chat. Let's see what we have going on here. Dollhouse writing is a useful concept I hadn't heard before. I think I was doing some dollhouse writing and I was feeling bogged down. Yes, and I was too. I think it's really common, and I'll see it in my own writing. I'll see it in others' writing, especially in first drafts, where I'm like, do we need to know that the leaves turn brown and that the weather got cold and suddenly it was December? It can just be December. And then we have another chat. This helped me realize that writing in the past tense or about the past doesn't have to be so fixed. You can free yourself from expectations and end up telling a more compelling story. I'm so glad that you feel freed. We should feel free as writers. We can do literally whatever. Some of whatever could be bad, right? It could not work, but we can really do whatever. So try doing whatever. I think it's helpful to feel like we can really say 1 billion years later the planet exploded. We sure can, right? And then we have here, the lesson helped me not throw in flashbacks that took up precious time in this, precious space in a story, and to control time differently. I'm glad that this helped you think about it that way. We are in control of time, and we can do whatever we want. And then we can trust readers to fill in a lot of the little blanks, I feel like. Yes, thumbs up to that, right? We do not need to cover every single step it takes to get from the front door to the kitchen if we just want to get to the kitchen. Let's just go to the kitchen. Let's just go to December. Let's go to 10 years later. Let's go wherever we need to go. And I think it'll make our story better, and it'll make us feel less bogged down as writers. So thank you everyone so much for sharing your experiences on the chat. This was a really great session, and I was glad to meet you all. I'm going to turn it back over to Julian.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sophia. I really appreciated the lesson. I know it was useful for me. You can tell it was useful for everyone else too. I'm going to share some links in the chat. Check them out when you have a sec. The first link is a feedback survey, so you can let Sophia know what a great job she did. Second is a link to fall classes. You'll click on it. You'll find there's no classes there. Oh my gosh, there is a preview class there. And I want you to click on that and see where it says waitlist and add your email address. And the reason to do that is because sometimes our classes fill really quickly. And that wait list is the first group of people we email when classes open for registration. So if you want to be the first to know, get on that wait list. You can also stay in touch with everything we're doing through our events page. There's a link there, our weekly newsletter, which I write. And you can pitch in if you'd like to help support free programs like this one at bluestoop.org/donate. Every dollar makes a difference. I really mean that. But most of all, I'm just glad you're here today. I'm glad you were able to take some time out of your busy schedule to practice some skills. Sophia, thank you for the wisdom, and thank you all for your time and energy. I'm going to hit pause on this recording and I'll be uploading it probably tomorrow. All right.